I actually started Concept Services. It's called Concept now, but back then it was Concept Services. I actually started it in 2002, but there was quite a story prior to that. And before I get into the actual story of how I started it, maybe I'll give you just a brief history of Concept for those of you who are not familiar with Concept. Concept is a lead generation company. We work with companies all across the country in helping them generate sales leads. And whether we do that via cold calling, whether we do it via social media, email marketing, pay-per-click, Google ads, that type of thing, whatever the solution is that best fits their needs, that's what Concept does. So that's the business I'm going to be describing. And before I get into that, let me kind of give you a little history of how I even came about that company. I had been in sales pretty much my whole career, and I loved sales. And the part of the sales process that I didn't really enjoy was the cold calling. And it's kind of ironic, that's the business that I formed, but it wasn't the most fun part of the sales process. The part that I really enjoyed was getting out and meet with customers. That was the most fun. I loved getting out, talking to them, going through that discovery process, finding out what their needs were, why did they have that need, what had they done in the past, what were they thinking now as far as their solution moving forward, and listening to that and then trying to determine how do I fit that into the product or service that I have to offer. And that was very, very interesting to me. But the thought of ending that meeting and coming back to the office and having to get on the phone and start cold calling, that was not as appealing to me. And as I began to kind of progress into my sales career and got a little bit more mature professionally and in sales, I began realizing that I wasn't alone with that feeling. And there were probably a lot of sales reps out there that they were like me. They loved being in front of the customer, not real crazy about making the cold calls. And so as I progressed through my career, I made the calls. You did it every day. That's what you did. But it wasn't my most fun thing to do. And then I began to realize that if I felt that way, there were a lot of other reps that felt that way. And if that were the case, then from a company standpoint, the companies were pretty inefficient. Because what that meant was, for me personally, I felt I was good. I enjoyed being out in front of the customer. But I wasn't as good being on the phone, and I didn't enjoy it. And if that was the case, natural human tendencies, you kind of migrate to what you like. And if there were a lot of people like me, which I was confident there were a lot of sales reps out there that they weren't good at that front end part of the sales process. And if they weren't good there, that was hurting the company that they worked for. It was inefficient. And because that in sales, as you all know, there's many aspects of it, but that front end, that getting the lead, getting the appointment, getting the opportunity in front of the customer, that's pretty big. And for me, that wasn't my strongest suit. I loved being in front of the customer where I could sit across from them. I could look at their body language. I could read their eyes. I could see their expression. If I said something and I saw them nodding their head, that gave me confidence that we were on the same page. I kind of felt like I had a full toolbox. But when I picked up that phone to make that phone call, I didn't know if that person on the other end was sitting back and saying, come on, buddy. He's thinking, come on, buddy. He's rolling his eyes, get to the point. I don't have time for this. I don't know if he was putting his phone on mute, talking to somebody else. I didn't know anything. And so I felt like my tool set was ripped away. And I just wasn't, in fact, at times I was intimidated making the call. It just wasn't my strong suit. And so as I began to realize that, I began to think, there's a business out there. If that's the case for me, that's the case for a lot of sales reps. That's the case for a lot of companies. And if that's the case, there's a business out there. And so that's what Concept does. That's ultimately the business that I started. So before I tell you exactly how I got started, I'm going to walk you back a little bit because I didn't immediately fall into that business. That wasn't the service that I initially started out.